G'day, I'm Mark from Tasmanian Off-Road Adventures. Welcome back to the countdown, number 6 to number 1 of Tasmania's best four-wheel drive tracks. If you haven't seen the previous video, I did count down from number 12 to number 7 of Tassie's best four-wheel drive tracks. And now we're going to get to the exciting part, the big countdown, number 6 to number 1. Number 6 is the Ring River track. Now this track is an absolute cracker. It is one of my all-time favourite four-wheel drive tracks here in Tassie. It's only about 6 kilometres long, so it's not a long track. Could take you as little as an hour, could take you several hours depending on how much trouble you have. The track runs from the Murchison Highway just out of Rosebery, heads down into the Ring Valley, across the Ring River and then up to the Montezuma Falls track. In winter or in periods of high rainfall, the Ring River itself can be impassable. The track, especially on the Montezuma side, is quite steep, very slippery and rutted out, so you'll have a bit of a challenge trying to get up that hill if that's the way you choose to go. The track is well known for having trees or large limbs fall across it, so you will need to take a chainsaw or alternatively be prepared to turn around and go back out the way you came. The track is quite scratchy, so be prepared to get some scratches on your vehicle. Vehicle wise, I would recommend a well set up four-wheel drive with 33-inch all-terrain or mud terrain tyres. I'd be prepared to have a winch because you may need to, especially if you're going up to the Montezuma end, you may find that you will have to winch up some of those hills. If I was taking my Hilux, I would still take it. It's got 32-inch all-terrain tyres. I do have a diff lock in the back and a winch, so I would take this, but I would also be prepared to cop some damage. Now if you're keen, this is a great track to do when you do the Montezuma Falls track. Bear in mind the Ring River track is much harder than the Montezuma Falls track, so be prepared for that. Number 5 is the Sandy Cape track, the iconic Sandy Cape track. Iconic because not only is it awesome four-wheel driving and amazing views, great camping, great fishing, ticks all the boxes, it's also known for its quicksand. The track is located on the west coast of Tassie, not too far from Arthur River. Now the track is managed by the Parks and Wildlife Service, so you do need a permit to travel or to four-wheel drive in this area. So you need to stop at the Arthur River Ranger Station and purchase yourself a four-wheel drive recreational driver pass, or you can buy it online. When you buy that pass, you will receive 2 DVDs, one on the Aboriginal history of the place and one on four-wheel driving. I highly recommend that you watch these 2 DVDs before you travel down there and start four-wheel driving on these tracks. Either way, it's well worth calling in to the Arthur River Ranger Station to speak to the rangers and get up-to-date local conditions. Find out how fast the rivers are flowing, if at all. Find out if there's been any reports of quicksand. You can also find out if there's been other vehicles or are other vehicles on the track. The four-wheel drive permit itself is only $30 for a month, so it's not going to break the bank. I think it's about $50 for an annual pass. From the little hamlet of Tema down to Sandy Cape, it's about 25 kilometres long. About half of that is inland track. The inland track is rocky in parts, it's also sandy in parts, is a little bit scratchy. The other half of the track is actually driving on the Sandy Cape beach. Time-wise, it's going to take you about 2.5 hours from Tema down to Sandy Cape itself, but allow a little bit extra time to explore the lighthouse and some of the other little tracks and attractions in the area. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, this track is well known for its quicksand. I've experienced firsthand the quicksand down near Sandy Cape and it's pretty terrifying. Your vehicle sinks very quickly and it is difficult to get out. So you need to be really careful. As I said, stop at the ranger station or preferably buy your four-wheel drive permit online. Watch the DVD because it's got some really good hints on how to cross the rivers. I personally wouldn't recommend driving this track in winter or after heavy rainfall, purely because those river crossings and the likelihood that quicksand will be in a lot of spots along the beach. You will need to travel in convoy with at least one, preferably 2 other vehicles. You can probably do this track in a standard four-wheel drive if you're careful enough and adjust your tyre pressures. I will say once again, I highly recommend that you watch the DVD that comes with a four-wheel drive permit before you get to this area. Make sure you have all the recovery gear and you know how to use it. If you do happen to get stuck in quicksand, you are going to need all that skill and knowledge to get your vehicle out, and as I said, always travel with one, preferably 2 other vehicles. There are vehicles lost on this track, and if you stop in at the Arthur River Ranger Station, they've got a wall full of photos of stuck four-wheel drive, so be very cautious. Me personally, I think the best way to do this track is as an overnight trip. I think it's too much of a rush to drive to Sandy Cape and back in one day. There's some ripper campgrounds around Sandy Cape. You need to go and find them, but there's some great campsites, sheltered campsites around the area. So my preference is to drive through Arthur River, head to Sandy Cape, check out the lighthouse, camp there. On the next day, drive back and continue your trip, or even better, spend a few days camped at Sandy Cape and really enjoy the experience. Number 4 on the list is Lake Cumberland. This is another track on the west coast. It's not too far out of Trial Harbour and not too far out of Zeehan. This track, it's only a short track, it's only 2.5 kilometres long, but it is a difficult four-wheel drive track. Now this track is reserved really for those that want a real challenge. As I said before, it's only a short track. There are lots of ruts at the bottom. Once you head up through the rainforest, it's very rocky. There's some big boulders. And there is one particular section of the track known as the switchback, which is extremely difficult, and care and caution must be taken. There are plenty of YouTube videos on this section of the track known as the switchback, but as per usual on four-wheel drive videos, it never looks as bad as it really is. Moving on from there, the track is still quite scratchy. You get up to the top of Lake Cumberland. Now, once you've stopped up at Lake Cumberland, had a bit of a look around, taken some photos, you need to come back down the track. And coming back down that switchback is just as hairy as going up it. Now this track, as I said, it's a real challenge. Vehicle-wise, I would recommend a really well set up four-wheel drive with 35-inch tyres. I wouldn't dream of taking my Hilux on that track. My 60 series Cruiser, no problem, but not this one. As I said at the start of the video, or start of this section, it is for those that want that extra challenge. Number 3 is the infamous Beaufort track. This is one of Tassie's best known four-wheel drive tracks. It's on the west coast of Tassie and it runs between the Sandy Cape track and the Western Explorer Road. The track is in the Arthur Pieman Conservation Area, which means you need a four-wheel drive permit to drive the track. I did cover all that information on the Sandy Cape track, so go back and have a listen to that because exactly the same rules apply. The track's about 15 kilometres long and it follows an old horse-drawn tramway from the old mining town of Beaufort through to what was Wales Head, or the port harbour of Wales Head, now known as Tema. Time-wise to do this track, it really does depend when you do the track and what the condition of the track is and how much water is on the track. This track is famous or infamous for its long, deep water holes. Now most of these water holes have a solid, rocky bottom. There is one exception, and the exception is a hole known as the canal. Now the canal is about 100 metres long, it's very deep, and unfortunately it doesn't have a solid rocky base, it is bottomless mud. Now you will see around most of the water holes there are chicken tracks on either sides. I can highly recommend that you drive on the track through the water. Most of the time the tracks on either side are actually more difficult than the water track itself. Now I personally would avoid this track in winter. It's too deep and too difficult and you could be out there all day, you could be stuck out there. There have been plenty of vehicles and there continue to be plenty of vehicles drowned and stuck in the canal. Now in the warmer months, when it's not so wet, there's no problem with taking a dual cab ute like my Hilux. I do this in 32-inch all-terrain tyres. I generally don't put the locker in for anything. I do carry a water blind because I am pretty particular about water getting into my radiator, damaging the fan and all that sort of stuff. So I do highly recommend a water blind, or at the very least take a tarp and some hockey straps. If you are going to tackle this track in winter, you need a really well set up four-wheel drive, 35-inch mud train tyres as a minimum. A locker or two will be real handy as well, and plenty of recovery gear. Now you may notice I couldn't help but wear my Beaufort track hoodie, so if you are interested in buying yourself a Beaufort track hoodie, have a look in the description below the video and I'll put a link so you can buy your own Beaufort track hoodie. Number 2 is the Pieman Heads track. One of my all-time favourites, and I kind of feel like I've said that about nearly every track on these two videos, but it is. I absolutely love this track. It's located on Tassie's west coast and goes from Granville Harbour up to the Pieman Heads at the mouth of the Pieman River. The track's around 22 kilometres long and I'd allow about 2.5 hours from Granville Harbour up to the heads. It's a great spot at the Heads. It's very scenic, a great place to stop and have lunch. There is a campground there. The campground's pretty average, to be fair, but there are new toilets there, so if you did want to make this an overnight trip, it is a great place to stay. Now, this is not an overly difficult track. It's not really about how difficult the four-wheel driving is. It's about the scenery. The track's got a bit of everything. There's some inland sandy track, there's some beach driving, there's some rocky coastal tracks with amazing views. So this one, as I said, is really about the scenery, not so much about difficult four-wheel driving. Now, when you hit the beach section at 4 Mile Beach, it has been reported, and I've heard people tell me there has been quicksand, or they've seen quicksand on that beach. I've never personally seen it, but I'm not going to doubt people that have told me it's there. It's not that far from Sandy Cape, so I'd definitely keep an eye out driving on the beach. Watch out for any sort of quicksand. Now, when you come off 4 Mile Beach, the track splits into two. The right hand side goes to the inland track, and the left hand side is the coastal track. They both loop round and end back up at the Pieman Heads. My favourite track, or part of the track by far, is the coastal track. If you take the coastal track, you go through Conical Harbour and Conical Rocks, and there are some amazing rock formations. You're by the ocean. It's absolutely amazing. I can't tell you how amazing it is. It's fantastic. I wouldn't bother doing this track in winter. It's very wet and it can get very boggy. Vehicle wise, you don't need too much. As I said before, it is a fairly easy four-wheel drive track. I would still, if you're driving something like my Hilux, I would still want a small suspension lift and maybe some 31-inch all-terrain tyres. Right, here we are, number one, drum roll needed. The best four-wheel drive track in Tasmania is Climby's track, which works out really well because it's also my favourite four-wheel drive track in Tasmania as well. The track's located on the west coast of Tassie. It goes from the two seaside towns of Trial Harbour and Granville Harbour. It's about 20 kilometres long, and once upon a time it used to actually be the main road between those two towns. Now, this track, the reason being that this is my favourite track is for a couple of reasons. It's a challenging four-wheel drive track. It's not really difficult, but it's certainly not easy. The other thing about having good four-wheel driving is the amazing views. I like to head up from Trial Harbour, and if you head up from Trial Harbour up to Granville Harbour, you look over to the right hand side and you've got the Heemskirk Range, and it's an amazing mountain scenery. You look over to the left and you've got amazing coastal views. Now, while you're looking at the two amazing lots of scenery, you need to keep your eye on the track, because there are some sections where you really need to keep an eye on the track. One of the things that this track is known or famous for is the Granite Creek crossing. Some people call it the waterfall crossing. Now, that's about halfway on the track, and it's a great spot to stop for lunch. From start to finish, the track will take about 5 hours, depending on how you go, how much trouble you have, or if you want to stop and do some sightseeing. Now, you will find plenty of videos and YouTube videos, DVDs, that sort of stuff, on people crossing Granite Creek in their four-wheel drives. Now, as per usual, four-wheel drive videos always look a lot easier on video than what they do in real person. And I can tell you, it's a pretty hairy crossing. It's actually really high up. You're literally on the edge of a cliff, and it's not for the faint-hearted. Now, you do not have to cross that crossing, the Granite Creek crossing or the waterfall crossing. There is a perfectly good bridge about 30 metres away that is very easy to cross. It's just a well-formed bridge, so you do not have to cross Granite Creek if you do not want to. If you're up for that extra challenge, then of course go for it, but just be very careful. People have lost their lives crossing Granite Creek, and there is a memorial there where you can see. It's a tragic story. Now, the southern part of Climby's track is more difficult than the northern part. So from Trial Harbour up to Granite Creek is the gnarly part. It's very washed out, it's very rocky. It's all about picking the right lines, and if you don't pick the right lines, you're going to get yourself into a bit of strife. So make sure you concentrate on the track. From Granite Creek onwards, it is easier. It's not easy, but it is easier than the southern part of the track. Reason being is when they rebuilt the bridge a few years ago now, they had to bring in some machinery, so they actually graded part of the track. So it is starting to cut up a bit rough now, and there are some pretty nasty looking mud bog holes on the northern end of the track too, which can be an issue if you are tackling the track in winter or if there's been lots of rainfall. Now, vehicle wise, I take my Hilux on that track when I do the four-wheel drive tag-along tours. It's running 32-inch all-terrain tyres. I do have a locker in the back, and I do actually switch the locker on a couple of times, but plenty of people come along with me without a locker. As long as you've got a spotter, because there are some sections on that where it is advisable to have a spotter. They can be a little bit gnarly. As per always, I would always take another vehicle with me, if nothing else than to have that extra spotter. And of course, if you do get into any strife, you've got another vehicle there to help. So there you have it. That's the countdown of Tassie's best four-wheel drive tracks from number 6 to number 1. In a previous video I did count down from number 12 to number 7, so if you haven't seen that video, jump on YouTube and go and find it and watch that one too. Now you may or may not agree with the countdown from 12 to 1, but it was voted by people on Facebook. My personal 12 would be a little bit different, but that's okay, we're all different, and it's good to get a wide range of opinions. But I think at the end of the day, the top 12 were pretty good, and I think there's not too much argument in most of those. Now I've covered the best 12 four-wheel drive tracks. I would just like to say, if you are from Tassie or you are travelling down to Tassie and you are planning on doing some of these tracks, please respect the tracks. Bear in mind that especially mainlanders come down here, and some, I'm not saying all, but some groups do the wrong thing. They put things on YouTube and even DVDs, do the wrong thing, and then we, us Tasmanian four-wheel drivers that are left here, we're the ones that are left here to deal with the fallout. So as I said, whether you're from Tassie or you're a mainlander, please, if you are coming down here to drive on our four-wheel drive tracks, please respect our tracks. Now just one last thing, if you've enjoyed the countdown and you like the look of the tracks, you want to come to Tassie or you already live here, you want to have a crack at them, but you're not confident doing them on your own, you don't have a bunch of mates that you can come with, contact me if you're interested on coming along on a four-wheel drive tag-along tour. You can find me on Facebook at Tasmanian Off-Road Adventures, or on the website, which is www.tasoffroadadventures.com.au. As I said, come along with me on a four-wheel drive tag-along tour and experience your own Tasmanian off-road adventure.